Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Rusty here. Welcome back to Impact Dynamics Live for this Thursday night reloading night. Always Thursday night is reloading night. Let us know if you are in the chat and you're doing some reloading tonight, because it's probably a good thing to be doing on a Thursday night, especially given news that we're starting to see more and more ranges open up and events starting to tentatively be announced, which is fantastic. Fantastic news. Right, hope you guys are well tonight. G'day to Scott and Craig and Charles and Anthony and Andrew, Mark, another Scott as well, Jimmy, Ben's here, all sorts of stuff. Yes, Andrew has already noticed the hat. Guess what delivery I had today? This is Ironside Coffee Company. I'm going to have to refocus that camera. There you go, Ironside Coffee Company. You can't hear me now. My coffee order arrived today, so I'm back on deck. I'm back on beans, which is fantastic. And I've tried their new dark roast, and that is wonderful. So if you like your dark roast coffees, highly recommend you to grab some Ironside coffee. And if you like your medium roast, well, you can actually they do them all. So just go and just spend all your money with Ironside. But save a little bit, because tonight's show is sponsored by Projectile Warehouse, and you can save 5% off at Projectile Warehouse by using the code IDLive5. That's number 5, IDLive5, and you'll be able to save further 5% off any savings up there already. And that includes Outer Edge Projectiles, which are the full ranges available there, and we'll find out a little bit more about them when Steve comes on board, of course. Now, as many of you guys know, or if you are here for your first time, this is the last week of the show. We wrap up Monday next week, so that means we've got Friday, Sunday and Monday left. Not too many shows, and of course tonight to get through as well. Tomorrow night, Tiff Dew out of the UK, Mr. Precision Rifle himself from the UK, is joining us to chat about all things that are happening over that side of the world, especially regarding firearms over the last few years, and where he's come from, where he's going, and what's happening there. It's a very interesting story, so I look forward to being able to share that with you. Hey, if you watched last night, how good was last night? Luke from the Bearded Chap came on board, and I didn't actually know he was a shooter when I first asked him to come on board. I just thought he had a fascinating, interesting, exciting story about his business, and then worked out he was a shooter. And he actually hung around last night in the Zoom room, and now is all booked in as soon as he can to get out to a local PRS style match when they are back up and running. So that was awesome and slightly unexpected, but we showed him, actually what was cool, we showed him a video, the little sort of 40-second PRS opener video, and we showed him that in the Zoom room with all of us sitting in there with him. And I think it was 29 seconds in, and he's like, right, I'm in. What do I do? What do I need to get? Let's make it happen. So that was exciting. So, Luke, you never know. You might see the Bearded Chap out at some shoots very soon, which will be good. All right. That is, I think, about what we need to do. We're just waiting for some... what are we going on there? Andrew's talking about... Oh, they're having some banter in between each other. Tonight's topic is intermediate ballistics, and I suspect if I attempt to explain what that is, I will ruin it completely. So I am definitely going to allow Steve Hurt from Outer Edge Projectiles to cover that off, and I'm not even going to give it an intro, because no matter what I say, it's going to be wrong, I think. So let's get the information from the man himself. Steve, how are you tonight?
Really good, Rusty. How are you?
I'm going great, mate. How is Orange? Is it freezing there this evening?
In the middle of it, you've probably got a good half inch of frost each morning on the ground waiting for you. But right. Other than that, it's beautiful, balmy weather. At least it's positive figures.
Oh, fantastic, mate! Excellent. And how is Outer Edge going?
Well, last week was absolute gangbusters. It's quite bad a little bit this week, but yeah, it's probably just as well, because we've had so much to do. I've been putting in some pretty big days to get the orders through, and also do some prep work on some research and development testing that we've got coming up tomorrow.
Brilliant.
So, we've had some pretty good results down at Lithgow in the last few days, and we've got a lot more to be tested again tomorrow.
Fantastic! Oh, well, good stuff. Good to hear new projectiles on their way, which is always exciting. New products and such. But fantastic, mate. So look, to intermediate ballistics, if I've said that correctly, that's tonight's topic, and you've spent a bit of time getting this prepared for everyone because you thought it was a very important topic that many people don't touch on. Can you give us like the quick little overview of what we're going to talk about, and then we'll delve into it?
Okay. Well, there are four main areas of ballistic research. One is internal ballistics, in other words, what happens when the result of your loading or the factory ammunition, the explosion, the ejection of the projectile down the barrel.
Yep.
Then you have intermediate ballistics, which is what happens to both the barrel and the bullet as the bullet leaves the muzzle. And there's an awful lot going on there that are very interesting, which we'll delve into.
Yep.
And then, of course, the third area is in-flight ballistics, and the fourth area, of course, is terminal ballistics.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at intermediate ballistics, we're basically talking about what happens to the barrel and what happens to the bullet.
Yep.
And there's an awful lot of dramatic change taking place very, very quickly in nanoseconds.
Right.
Basically, what's happening is that as the bullet leaves the barrel is being significantly affected in a number of ways. The peak pressure from ignition inside a barrel is usually between 58 and 63,000 psi. For most people who need to put that into a context, that's over 35 tons per square inch.
Wow.
Right? At 35 tons per square inch, we're talking about enormous pressures. Mm-hmm. By the time the bullet gets to the muzzle, we're talking about 5.5, 5.75 ton per square inch. And what happens to the barrel or to the muzzle at that point when the bullet reaches there under those conditions is entirely dependent on the steels from which the barrel was made and what's been done to the barrel and how the barrel was made. And to give you a classic example of that, when the bullet is approaching the muzzle is at that point in time at its thinnest point. Generally speaking, unless you've got basically a straight tube, your muzzle is the thinnest point. And most people these days are tending to want to run muzzle brakes. What people don't understand when they put a muzzle brake on a muzzle needs to be reviewed. What basically happens is that if you have a barrel that is a clean barrel that is not threaded, generally speaking, you don't have much, if any, change. But when you turn down the muzzle to receive a thread for a muzzle brake, what that last inch or two of the muzzle will do will depend largely on how that barrel was made. So if it was a hammer forged barrel, that area will tend to want to constrict a little bit, choking the muzzle. That's a good thing. A slight choking of the muzzle is actually a very good thing to happen. But if the barrel was cut rifled, the chances of anything happening are not very much. But if it was a pull button barrel and the outside was relieved and the thread cut, then it tends to want to expand, blunderbussing the muzzle if it's not done properly. Mm-hmm. Now, there are a number of ways of addressing that. And it all comes down to the thread diameter and thread pitch. On a hammer forged barrel like a Lithgow or a Sarco or a Ticker or a Ruger or anything along those lines, most of them, I think the Tickers and the Sarcos are cut at 14:1, but just about everybody else is doing 5/8/24. On a hammer forged barrel, you can get away with those wall thicknesses and tolerances. On a pull button rifle, you can't. Now, how how you address that really comes back down to the thread diameter and pitch that needs to be applied, and it will come down to the way that barrel was made. So if you're running a 308 in a hammer forged barrel, a 5/8 to 24 is fine. But if you're running a cut rifle barrel, you might want to tweak it up to around about a 16 or a 17 mil thread. And if you're running a full button rifle, you really want to be looking at around about a 19 millimeter or 3/4 inch thread cut to stop that barrel from blunderbussing at the muzzle. Now, what a lot of fellas are doing, of course, is because barrels are basically a consumable item, they'll grab their ticker or their Lithgow or what have you, particularly in competition, they've run their 3, 4, 5,000 rounds through it, need to replace the barrel. Getting a replacement factory barrel has all been impossible, so they'll go to an aftermarket barrel supplier, not realising that the barrel is made differently and therefore requires different thread fittings at the end to receive the muzzle brake. Now, I know I'm going a bit quickly here, but what that is really, really important, because it's understandable that somebody who said, look, I've got a really great result from my Lithgow 105. This is the muzzle brake that came off it. Replace the barrel and put this muzzle brake back on, please. Now, if that was a 30 cal and a 5/8 to 24 using a pull button barrel, you could end up with less than satisfactory results. It really does depend on the quality of the brake and how well the gunsmith executed the installation and the thread cut, was it centre turned and all that kind of stuff. Now, the other thing that's critical about the installation of the muzzle brake is that the hole clearance.
Yep.
So if you've got a we'll come back to the 308. Most people think that a 308 is actually a 7.62, but it's not. It's a 7.823. So the muzzle brake needs to be around about 8.8 or half a mil side clearance, so that you don't get air cushioning between the brake and the bullet, giving irregular results. So on one hand, that's what happens to the barrel. The next step is to look at what happens to the bullet and then how we marry them together.
Just half a sec, Steve. On that there with the you talked about the barrel and having muzzle brakes on. Is that effect only when we're threading a barrel, or if we've got like a thinner profile barrel, does that come into it as well? Is that another factor that should be considered?
To a much lesser extent, on a clean barrel that is not threaded, it's much less important.
So it's the difference between it being clean to actually then having a change, or cutting into it, rather than it being a clean end on it.
When you turn the muzzle down, firstly you're tending to turn it down to less than what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're cutting a thread which is normally at least a millimetre, maybe more deep.
Yeah.
Right? So you've gone from a 15, 16 millimetre muzzle. Then you've turned it down to 5/8, which is 15.88. Mm-hmm. And then you've cut another mil off that.
Yep.
And then you halve that and subtract the calibre, and you're really talking about 3.5 mil of steel trying to contain 5.5, 5 3/4 tonne per square inch. And that's got to go somewhere. The only way that it can be made to go forward only is for the thickness of that material around the muzzle to be thick enough to contain that. Now, if you don't have threads cut into it, a 16 millimetre muzzle is fine, even on a 308. And obviously, when you're running smaller calibers on the 22, the 6 mil, 6.5, you've got a bigger margin for error if you're still using that same thread cut. when you're looking at something like a Tikka or a Sako at 14x1, you're still getting away with it solely because it's a hammer forged barrel.
Yes. Yeah.
When you then go to say a full button rifle installed back into the same original platform, and then turning that down to put a very small muzzle cut and thread on it to receive the original muzzle brake, now your tolerances are really, really fine.
Yeah.
And some people seem to believe that the muzzle brake installed on there will help that steel contain the pressures. Well, it does to a point, but you've got to remember that even the very, very best wire cut thread installations have only got 40% engagement. If it had any more than that, you wouldn't be able to screw it on.
It's a downside, yeah.
Right, so installing the muzzle brake does, to a small extent, help contain that pressure back on.
Yep.
But you would not sensibly, under any circumstances, fire that rifle without the brake if it was turned down to a 3 or a 3.5 mil wall thickness, if it was a full button rifle.
Understand. Thank you for clarifying. On to the bullet.
Right. Okay. Right. When the bullet leaves the barrel, the bullet is actually a resistance plug, and it's doing the velocity it's doing because of the enormous pressures behind it. Those pressures might be declining from peak pressure, but they're still very, very high. At normally around about 5.5, 5 3/4 ton per square inch. So what's happening when that bullet relieves the obstruction to the gases? The gases are now accelerate, even though the bullet is not. And the gases that accelerate are wanting to accelerate to something like 3 to 4 times the velocity of the bullet. That's 12,000 feet per second. So for around about 3 to 4 calibers, the gases are trying very, very hard to overtake the bullet. Right? On a flat-based bullet, when the bullet leaves the barrel, you might have some drawings there to throw up and have a look. And if they haven't come through yet, then we'll talk about them a little bit later.
They have not come through. I'm sorry, Steve, not yet.
Okay. Basically, what happens if you have a flat-based bullet, as it leaves the muzzle, the gases tend to fly out from the muzzle at about a 45-degree angle. And that is largely why flat-based bullets tend to be used at short-range competitions like 100-metre or 200-metre bench rest, because they're stable right off the end of the muzzle. If the length is right and the barrel twist for the bullet chosen is correct, then a flat-based bullet with a perfectly executed crown, the gases will fly out at 45 degrees, will not overtake the bullet, and the bullet has got what we call a clean flight path. The next best option to that would be a rebaited boat tail, where the boat tail is stepped in from the shank, and you've got a little bit of a flap between the shank and the rebaited boat tail.
Yep. And
the gases, whilst they're wanting to overtake the bullet, hit that little flap and still come out probably somewhere between 45 and 60 degrees. And the bullet still has a relatively clean flight path. Now, we're talking about an unbraked muzzle here, right? No brake, no muzzle brake at all, no suppressor, nothing along those lines. We're talking about a clean muzzle.
Yes.
When a boat tail bullet is used, particularly aggressive boat tails, which are designed to be really high BC, high flight path efficiency, we must remember that the bullet is now a high BC bullet in both directions, and that the gas coming up the tail now has a clean flight path to overtake the bullet and completely envelop it. So the bullet is now flying through its own pressure cloud, and it's applying leverage on the back of that boat tail bullet, which tends to want to destabilise it. Now, you can address that a couple of ways by accelerating the twist rate of your barrel, but it still requires an extremely well-made bullet and a perfectly executed crown, which is square to the ball, so that when the bullet leaves the muzzle, that the gases are leaving evenly.
Yep.
But that doesn't do anything to address the gas cloud that is overtaking the bullet. And if anybody's ever seen high VC bullets in a shadowgraph high-speed camera scenario, you'll actually see from the Kersiet site where you're talking about 1.1 million frames a second. There's a very short period of time where you can't see the bullet at all because the gas cloud from the expanding gases has completely enveloped and overtaken the projectile. Mm-hmm. This is a destabilising factor. Now, there are a number of ways that you can address that, and probably the most popular way or the best way of addressing a high VC bullet with an aggressive boat tail is to put a muzzle brake on your muzzle.
Okay.
Because that diverts the gases and prevents the that diverts the gases and prevents the gases from overtaking the bullet at any point in time. Yes, it's applying a small amount of leverage to the boat tail, but it never gets the opportunity to overtake any more than about half the bullet length, reducing enormously the disturbance that the bullet has to fly through.
Yep.
Now, when we're looking at a muzzle brake, there are probably... Do you want to stop there if there are any questions, and we'll come back and talk about muzzle brake design to see how that we can use that to address the bullet leaving.
I was going to ask you about you alluded to the fact that you can do things to try and stop that, or with the boat tail, that your effect you're getting with a high BC on the back end bullet by using twist rate. Are you able to sort of talk about that, how that works? Because I found that curious.
When look, for a bullet to be stable, you really want the minimum dispersion forces applied to it. So the bullet needs to leave the muzzle and the crown absolutely perfectly square. Mm-hmm. It's extremely challenging to achieve that, particularly with a traditional bullet, because the base of every traditional bullet has a rounded chamfer on each edge. Mm-hmm. If it didn't, they wouldn't be able to extrude it from the mould.
Yep.
All right? Those rounded edges, as they leave a muzzle, mean that it's virtually impossible to get even gas dispersion around the bullet as it leaves the muzzle. Mm-hmm. To some extent, you can resolve that by accelerating the twist rate, which accelerates the spin rate of the bullet, helping to stabilise it earlier.
Okay.
And that it doesn't stop the dispersion forces of the gases being applied, it just helps it resist it better.
Yep. Makes sense. There is a question there that may be relevant at the moment, which is about preference on muzzle crowns. Do you find the design of the crown can affect play a role in what you're talking about?
I think yes, it does. I prefer a flat crown with an 11-degree chamfer toward the outside.
Okay.
Look, to be perfectly, a round crown will work if it's executed perfectly, but they never are. Okay. They tend to use machinery which is designed to make it cost effective to put a crown on it to prevent that little exit point right at the tip of the threading,
Yep.
not the threading, the rifling. I prefer a target crowning, most definitely, and even my hunting rifles have a target crown. Yes, they do. So I literally apply a target or an 11-degree crown to every rifle, whether it's a hunting rifle or a target rifle or just a fun thing.
Mm-hmm. And another question that's probably possibly relevant at this point is: does the barrel length play any role in this process?
It does for harmonics and it does for nodal point development.
Okay.
But it depends. If you're going to have a light sporter weight barrel that's 26 inches long or 28 inches long, and it's very, very thin and light, it might. But generally speaking, if somebody's going for a 26-inch or longer barrel, they tend to be heavier, like a number 5 or a number 6 profile,
sure,
which tends to negate most of those problems.
Okay, so it perhaps affects elsewhere more than this specific part we've talked about so far. Yeah, sure.
I wouldn't get too attached to barrel length on that one, though.
No.
But the other thing it will do, though, is if you've got a 26 or a 28-inch barrel, the pressure at the crown will be less.
Okay, yep. Makes sense.
So it probably would reduce the influence, but how much I couldn't really say. Just about everything I've ever done the maths on has had an exit pressure of somewhere between 8.5 and 12,000 psi. And to be honest, when you're up at that level, which is still over 5 tonne, I think it's fairly academic.
Sure, no problems. There's talk in the chat about Remington rifles, the barrels having a slightly small diameter choke in the last inch or so of their barrel. Are you familiar with that at all?
I don't want to get sued by what I would say about a Remington barrel.
Well, I mean, they're bankrupt anyway, so what are you worried about? All right, carry on, Steve. Let's go with the next part.
Yeah. Okay, so when you look at all of the massive kerfuffle that happens when the bullet leaves the muzzle, and you've got these gases. Look, the gases, even though they're not oxygen and nitrogen anymore, the sectional density and the mass of the gas molecules is similar to the air that it's hitting. So it's going from 12,000 feet per second, hitting the air, and the gas molecules hitting the other gas molecules in the air run out of steam pretty quickly. Doesn't matter how fast you're traveling, when you run into something your own size, things are going to go bang and fly off in all sorts of different directions. And you're going to get a massive shock wave as a result of doing that. And you want to keep that shock wave as far away from the bullet as you possibly can.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
Now, that only extends for about 3 to 4 calibers. But that's, depending on the projectile you're running, that might be inch and a half. But in some of the higher BC bullets where the gas is given a clean flight path, that might extend out to maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches, where the or 38 to 50 mil, where the gases are applying their destabilizing forces to the back of the bullet. And it's the back of the bullet that we're really interested in intermediate ballistics. The front of the bullet is not so important. It becomes important once it's in free flight.
Sure. Yep.
So we then come back and look at the issue of, okay, a muzzle brake has a job to do. And the job tends to be broken up into 3 really important areas. One is recoil reduction. One is the maintenance of sight picture. And the other one is not to blow the shooter's head off with concussion. And whilst that might sound a little bit facetious. If you're firing a large number of rounds in quick succession, that concussion is actually a very serious issue. I was really keen to hear what Luke had to say about that the other night when he was talking about changing the brake from one configuration to another so that he was minimising his concussion, which was interfering with his capacity to shoot well.
Yep.
Well, of course. But what in all the research that I've done on muzzle brakes, I've found that of the three areas that are really important, I haven't found one muzzle brake that does all three exceptionally well. You'll find that a muzzle brake might do one thing exceptionally well. A very, very small handful might do two things very well. But I haven't seen anything that does all three things really well. So without wanting to get into trouble with, say, Terminator, I look at the Terminator or the APA type brakes, and they are really, really good and efficient in reducing recoil. And if you're hanging on to a 375 snipe tack, shade tack, 50 Browning, or any of that ilk, the management of recoil is really important. If you want to enjoy your shooting.
Yes.
To be perfectly honest, if you're running a 22 cal or a 6mm or even a 6.5, from a recoil perspective, I wonder why you would need a muzzle brake at all.
No, it's not. It's not the need for it.
There's no need for it. But there is a sideline benefit in terms of the stabilisation of a high BC bullet. Firstly, we'll come back to that in a minute. We'll finish the areas where the muzzle brake really needs to be importantly applied on a small caliber rifle, particularly for PRS application. Where most blokes, I believe, are running 6 and 6.5s. Is the maintenance of sight picture.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
And there are much better brake designs for sight picture maintenance as opposed to recoil management. And what I found is that the ones that are really good in sight picture maintenance also tend to be relatively good in muzzle blast management. In other words, you're not getting concussed. And I'm not here to promote other people's product, but there are muzzle brakes out there that do the sight picture maintenance and muzzle blast management much better, and in my view are far more important than recoil management. So what's essentially important is that the gap between the plates as the bullet passes through has two critically important issues. Firstly, the gap between the plate should not be wider than the shank length of the bullet. So that and what's important about that is that the front of the shank is entering the first hole at about the same time that the shank is exiting the muzzle. That's important because the gas can't overtake it. That's critically important. Now, some gas is going to get past that because you've got to have clearance between the bullet and the brake. All right? That plate gap is critically important. And in my view, the plate needs to be at 90 degrees to the ball. That is not the most efficient way to manage recoil.
Yeah, I get it. Yep.
It is the most efficient way to strip gases.
Yes.
And if you have a flat plate with a clean hole, like a washer, you are efficiently diverting the gases properly and correctly. And it's really important that plate be absolutely flat because it's almost the equivalent of the crowning on your muzzle. You don't want it to be offset at an angle to the flight path. Otherwise, you're going to get you're going to advantage the gases from one side to the other, in applying leverage to the boat tail.
Yep.
So a high BC boat tail bullet passing through a muzzle brake will improve stability and accuracy if it is really well designed and exceptionally well executed.
And you're saying, Steve, that the 90 degree, the nice, obviously well made 90 degree type brakes are going to be more favourable in this scenario than the ones that sort of angle back to reduce the recoil down. And I imagine the ones that are trying to think of the word, but are balanced, so they're coming out left and right as opposed to left and right and underneath or above or something on those lines, as long as they're ported in a balanced manner? Or does that have another effect?
Okay. I make brakes, but I don't make them for sale.
Yep.
I do them for myself, right? I know that there are a few good gunsmiths like Jeff Borg around who are making their own muzzle brakes.
Yep.
And that they work extremely well.
Yep.
There is absolutely no way on God's little green earth I would ever run a muzzle brake that was a radial in style. In other words, no plate and just holes drilled all the way around it.
Okay. Yep.
Right. Because there is no opportunity. Basically, under that scenario, yes, the gases are coming out all over the place, but you've got this tunnel that the bullet is passing through, and some destabilizing gases are cushioning between the bullet and the brake.
Yep.
And I think it's extremely important that the gas gets stripped off somewhere in that bullet shank length. The other thing that's really important is that the blast plates, is what I call them, or the blast shields, or the plates that they pass through, have got to be a certain proportion. They can't be too thick, otherwise you'll start creating a gas cushion between the bullet and the clearance.
Yep.
I prefer to see nothing more than 2.5 mil thick, and I've seen plates that have been like nearly 4 and 5 mil thick, and wonder how on earth they could possibly shoot.
Right. Yep.
So all my brakes, or all the brakes that I use, whether they're mine or somebody else's, are all 90 degree ported. They will be as big as I can possibly fit into that lump of steel.
Yep.
Safely.
Yep.
And there will never ever be a vertical hole underneath, but I do use vertical holes on the flat on top. And I calibrate that to the caliber to give sufficient downforce to maintain sight picture.
Okay.
But it's a tricky one to get right. If it's too small, you'll get muzzle jump. If it's too big, it's going to push the muzzle down.
Yep.
Right. So I've been using a formula. I'm not sure I've got the formula absolutely spot on. So what I tend to do is I make it too small to start, and then just go up in very small increments until I get it right. Because if you make it too big, you've got to throw it out and make another one.
That's right. You got to start again.
Yeah.
There's a lot in the muzzle brake side. I think I certainly have seen guys who have gone, oh, I can do that. I've got a CNC or I've got a mill or whatever, and away they start going, and then often they end up buying one that I've seen because they shoot somebody else's rifle and go, oh, hang on, there might be a bit more to this.
Yeah, well, when you shoot a rifle with a good brake on it that allows you to maintain sight picture at short range, you know you've got it right.
Yep.
It's easy enough to maintain a reasonable sort of sight picture at 1,000 metres, 1,500 metres, 2,000 metres. But at 100 metres, it doesn't have to jump very much for you to lose it altogether.
No, not wrong. Yeah.
And it's in that scenario that you know you've got your muzzle brake right. Now, if you're using one of those angled back brakes, don't get me wrong, they have a place.
Yeah.
And if I'm hanging on to a 50 BMG, yes, I'm going to have inner earplugs, I'm going to have outer ear muffs and a helmet on and all the rest of it. right? Because I
Yep.
hate the back blast.
Yep. Yep.
But how else are you going to manage the recoil?
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
So it's not that style of brake doesn't have a place. It certainly does. But I do tend to think that people putting them on a 22 250 are looking at it more as a fashion accessory than a worthwhile tool.
As with
but the last thing,
many things in this sport, it's horses for courses, isn't it? It's using the right tool for the job, and the more you understand that, the better you can choose that tool, because it doesn't necessarily mean one is wrong. It's just application is so key.
Well, the other thing that a lot of blokes don't realise that if the muzzle brake is well and properly designed and installed, it will also it has the potential to significantly reduce your ESs and SDs.
Right, okay.
And that's, to me, is really important. So when I'm looking at a muzzle brake, if I'm using good hearing protection and I'm using a relatively small or light caliber, concussion blast is not really something I need to worry about.
Yep.
Recoil is all but irrelevant. Sight picture becomes my sole focus.
Yes.
Sorry, my primary focus. And I'll know if I've done it right if my ESs and SDs come down significantly. And you tend to notice that more on 6.5s and above.
Okay.
Your ESs and SDs are not going to come down a lot on 6 mils and below. They might come down 1 or 2, maybe 3 feet a second. But on a 6.5, 7, 30 cal, they'll actually come down noticeable and measurable percentages.
Yep.
But so if I'm talking about a 30 cal, and by that I mean a 308 or 300 Norma, by 30 cal and below, I'm really interested in maintaining sight picture.
Yep.
And reducing my ESs and SDs. The muzzle blast and the recoil, to me, at that point in time, I really don't care.
Yeah, not so much of a factor.
It does. You do then have to start thinking about how you're going to handle it with a 300 Norma.
Yep.
And I don't change the design for a 300 Norma. I just add more ports.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
I'm generally running a 3-port, but we'll go to a 4-port if really necessary.
Got it. Yep.
So that is what. So if you're running a high BC boat tail port, if the competition you're in will allow you to, a muzzle brake is a real bona fide bonus. It's a real tool, a real asset.
Yeah.
But it has to be well designed and well executed. And the biggest mistake most people make is choosing the wrong thread to put on.
Yeah.
And by that I mean diameter, not pitch.
Yep.
If somebody says they've got an 18 and an 18 by 1, and somebody's talking about an 18 by 1.5, I'm really not interested in the conversation. It's the diameter that's important, not whether it's a 1 mil or 1.5 mil pitch or what have you.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, got a link through from Hamish Allen about a US Department of Defense indicating 5/8 by 24 thread is not enough for a 30 cal. Hence, moving to 3/4 thread. And some.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
But it'll depend. It'll depend on whether it was a hammer forged barrel or what have you. And you've got to keep in mind that the grunts don't tend to get issued hammer forged barrels for long range sniper rifles.
Sure. Yep.
Right, and that testing actually came from the US, and they demonstrated that if you're running a 30 cal, particularly above 308, you really do need a 3/4 inch or 19.1 millimeter thread.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Good to know. Good to know, Matt. And so there's a question here about does powder selection affect the performance of the brake at all?
That's a good question that I can't really give a definitive answer to, but I think it really depends on how much of the powder is being burnt. If all your powder is burnt, then I think you would get a different result than if you were getting 90% of your powder burnt or 95% of your powder burnt. I run some pretty sophisticated load forecasting stuff, and quick load is one of them. I use about 5 of them.
Yep.
But with quick load, if I just won't use a load that produces less than 95% burn rate, and I really am looking for 98% and above.
Yeah, okay.
Because if you haven't burned all the gases, then when it gets to the end of the muzzle and let's rip, I guess the question is it 94, 96, 95 that got burnt? And where's it burning, and how's that behaving when it hits the first blast plate? And that's not something I've been able to monitor or measure at this stage. I don't have the 1.1 million frames a second camera.
We'll get onto that there, mate. We'll get onto that. That'll be you just upgrade your web camera a bit. We'll be good. We'll be good to go. So, Steve, in terms of we've fairly extensively covered muzzle brakes, I think. Is there more to it? I mean, there's always more to discuss. Is there more that we want to delve into?
There are other tools that you can use in terms of barrel weights and what the rimfire fellows call bloop tubes.
Yep.
I tend to want to stay away from that subject because I know bloop tubes are legal, but when you read or interpret different acts around the country, I think it's more that they're tolerated rather than legal. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
But and I'm thinking primarily of our local legislation rather than a comprehensive appraisal of all the other state legislation. But a bloop tube on a rimfire works.
Yep.
A bloop tube on a centerfire never will work.
Right.
Because you're creating a gas cloud chamber and then confining it for the bullet to pass through, and it has absolutely no way of having a clean flight path.
Yep. Okay.
And that's simply because the gases are going faster than the bullet. Whereas with the rimfire, everything subsonic. Normally for rimfire competitions, they are.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was basically the context in which I wanted to put it in.
Yeah, yeah.
And then thought I'll throw it open for questions from there, because anything after that is starting to make it probably a little bit too technical.
Sure. So a good question here from Dave. It talks about so somebody has made some conscious decisions about their intermediate ballistics, something they may never have thought about it. So they've spent time researching brakes, and they've got one, and they've on their new barrel they've got the appropriate thread. What can they expect the actual result of putting some time into this area to actually see?
I'm sorry, the first half of that question, I got interrupted in the transmission. It was very patchy, so I missed the first half of it. Sorry, mate.
No worries, Steve. So if someone is they've taken what you've said on board, and they've spent some time thinking about this part of their ballistics travel, I guess, and so they've got an appropriate brake, and they've got a new barrel anyway, so they've got a better thread suited for that, and they're quite aware of the projectiles they're using, and they're making conscious decisions around this. What sort of improvements are they going to see as a reward for spending the time here?
Look, it's very hard to quantify because there are so many variables about the quality of the barrel, the quality of the brake, the quality of the installation. But I've seen improvements up to 30% on stuff that was good to start with, and then properly designed and installed brakes and what have you.
Yep.
And particularly in the ESs and SDs, you may not see huge improvements on the target at 100 metres, but you will at a K plus simply because you've reduced your ESs and SDs.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So that's sort of the way we may quantify. Of course, putting in your barrel on all these sort of things. But we're wanting to stack things in our favour, and no doubt there are other points across the ballistics travel that we will take into account.
Well, the other thing a break will do in regards to accuracy is that it will broaden your tolerance for nodal points.
Okay.
So if I'm calculating or trying to find a nodal point in a 30-inch barrel, and I put a muzzle brake on it.
Yep.
I don't care what the dimension of the muzzle brake is. I will add half an inch to the barrel length for the purposes of the calculation. But what that does, because you're evening out your ESs and your SDs, is that it tends to broaden the nodal point. So some nodal points are very sensitive to air temperature, pressure, velocity, all that kind of thing.
Yes.
Right. If you'll know, I first started my professional career with a 243, and using exactly the same ammunition and exactly the same rifle. I would have one day I'd be shooting half-inch groups. And the next day, with exactly the same kit, you couldn't shoot a 2-inch group. And what it was literally nothing more than a change in the temperature from shooting in the early morning to shooting in the early afternoon.
Yeah.
It was really, really sensitive to those kind of changes. A properly installed and calculated load with a muzzle brake will broaden that quite a lot. And it's actually to the point where if it's done correctly, for short range shots, you wouldn't even have to make any accommodation for it. The only time you would accommodate any climatic change would be for extremely long shots. Yep. And by that I mean way more than 600.
Yep. Yeah. We certainly do see guys who when they're loading for trying to find a load for their season for PRS, and they will consider the environment they're in. They'll consider what matches they're thinking of going to, and they'll make some decisions based around that. It's not uncommon to see and to hear of if they're in Victoria and they're loading, they're testing the load when it's cooler, but they plan to shoot Darwin or they plan to go up to Queensland or something on those lines. They'll favour down the lower end of that node, try and find the start of it, so to speak, and so they've got a good buffer point there, because you may not go a colder temperature or lower conditions, but you'll probably encounter something warmer. And so interesting point you make about sort of giving it a larger buffer zone, really.
It's actually if it's properly designed and well installed, it's actually amazing as to how broad it can sometimes be. I've got a couple of rifles now where for anything short of 500 metres, I don't even bother worrying about the atmospherics, because I know exactly what it's going to do. But I also have rifles that are a little bit more sensitive than that.
Sure.
And I think there are probably two calibers that irritate me endlessly in that regard. But I just have to be conscious of what the load is and the conditions under which I'm shooting at the time. And sometimes I'll just leave that particular rifle behind because it doesn't like it.
Yep, absolutely. Stevie, there's a question here from Dave about the Outer Edge style projectiles. Do they gain anything more for, like, the fact that they're a lathe turned copper projectile? Does that benefit being a boat tail going through a muzzle brake more significantly than a traditional type projectile?
I should put Dave on the payroll.
He's asking all the right question.
When I said to you before that a jacketed lead bullet has a rounding at the base.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is it's the only way they can actually extrude the bullet out of the die.
Yep.
On a lathe turned bullet, you can actually give it a very sharp angular. Mm-hmm. So it'll look like that as opposed to rounded.
Yes.
That sharp edge has two benefits. One is that it gives you a clean exit from the muzzle. Mm-hmm. And the other one is that it actually improves BC by around about 1.5%.
Yep. Yeah. Right.
So there really is a benefit to it, but it would be extremely hard to see it by picking it up and looking at the bullet.
Yeah.
We specifically designed. It was a result of research done by the American Aeronautical Institute of Engineers. They ran a whole series of tests on both aircraft and projectiles and rockets, and they came to the conclusion that a very sharp edge on anything flying will improve the BC or lessen its resistance to flight mm-hmm. than a rounded edge.
Yep.
So that's had huge influence particularly on some of the high-speed, high-altitude aircraft. And then they realised, bullets are going about this fast. And they started doing tests on that, and even Litz himself has admitted that he ran a series of tests on it and actually acknowledged the fact that it was so, that it's true.
Yep.
The only reason that the extruded bullet manufacturers don't do it is because they can't.
Gotcha. Yep. Because of the process they use.
Yeah, and it's all to do with the manufacturing process, not because they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they do go to extraordinary lengths to minimise their meat plate noses and do the very best they can on getting that angle right on the exit.
Yep.
But it's still a rounded edge, and there's not much more they can do about that.
Sure. Yeah, just limitation of the way it's done. Yeah. I've got a quick question for you, Steve. How do you keep so much in your head? Because I think I've forgotten what we talked about when we opened the show. How is it that you are able to retain these, the studies that are done by a certain group? I don't remember what you said. Certain group for how is it just because there's such a significant passion for you and that you spend literally all day doing it?
In many ways, I'm like Luke. I've just taken a different path. Mm-hmm. He wants to win the competition. Mm-hmm. I can identify with that. Fantastic. All power to you.
Yep.
I am absolutely obsessed with making the best product possible. So I probably spend 3 days a week, mostly in my non-manufacturing time. So normally Saturdays and Sundays, and I might get 2 half days or evenings during the week where I do nothing but spend somewhere between 8 and 10 hours a day researching.
Yep. Yeah.
And you should see my documentation files.
I bet. I bet.
I have a 30-page scientific white paper here, mm-hmm. just on the nuances of the Miller's stability formula.
Right. Well, that answers my question then.
And I don't know whether I'm OCD or just need psychological help. I don't know.
Oh, fantastic, mate! Fantastic. Well, I tell you what, as you know, this is the wrap up week of this show, but we have certainly appreciated your 3 appearances on this show, and I hope I'm allowed to say this, but we've talked about what the future will hold doing what we're doing. We obviously I've been clear with people that this format is changing, but we want to do something, and the really exciting news for those who are watching is that Steve has said he would like to be involved, or is happy to be involved in what happens in the future. So he won't disappear. I mean, you can always find him at Outer Edge Projectiles, of course, but he will still be part of this community and still be able to put the amazing stuff that he does spend 400 hours a week researching out and provide that in a distilled version to many of you, which is an amazing to have someone in the community that has that level of understanding that is also then able to put it forward. So I'm looking forward to seeing what this whatever the next chapter holds. But it's been wonderful to have you on this show, Steve, and we look forward to whatever that form that takes next.
Thanks very much, Rusty, and for the guys who've entrusted us with some orders and product going out. Thank you. And I do really look forward to catching up with you. I've actually really enjoyed this process, and I'm more than happy to continue to come and play.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I know you. The really good thing is it's not just been yourself on the nights that you're on. You're regularly in the chat or talking with people or answering questions there as well, which is part of the whole community rather than just appearing from time to time. Not that we mind people appearing from time to time. That's also wonderful, but you've really embraced it. So it's been fantastic. I've just dropped the link to the Outer Edge Projectiles listing on Projectile Warehouse. Don't forget you can save 5% off anything at Projectile Warehouse using the code IDLive5. And Steve, that's about wrapping it up tonight, mate. Thank you very much, and always a pleasure to see you and talk with you, and we will no doubt do that again soon.
Good on you, mate. Thank you very much.
Cheers, mate. Righto, guys. Well, that is Thursday reloading night. Thanks for everyone who got involved and asked questions. I'm sorry I know we didn't quite get to all of them, but we certainly covered a lot tonight. That might be an episode. It'll be out on the podcast tomorrow. If you don't realise, this is actually on an audio podcast as well, and that might be a really good way to have that playing probably 400 times over to delve into some of the stuff that was mentioned there. And as said tonight, sponsored by Projectile Warehouse. You can save 5% or an extra 5% off everything from Outer Edge Projectiles, as well as from the whole range there at Projectile Warehouse using the code IDLive5. That would be excellent. Good news is Australia Post is starting to get a little bit better at delivering things in a more reasonable time, which is a nice welcomed relief. Tiff Dew is on tomorrow night. Ironside Coffee's hat. Go check them out as well, and all sorts of stuff going on, guys. Thanks so much for hanging around, and great to hear from you guys and see you. And we will see you tomorrow night. Cheers.
Hey, hey, pretty baby, pretty baby. Find out what you see.